Welcome to the Human Everywhere podcast. I'm Jason Mott, one of your hosts. Human Everywhere is a production of Deep Space Predictive Research Group. Deep Space Predictive Research Group was founded by Lyris Ullman, myself, and Ubi Cimieri. What Human Everywhere asks us to do is to consider what it means to truly be human wherever we go, not just here on Earth, but as we travel into space. Over the last several years, we have seen more and more people entering into space to work, to travel, and we know that in the near future, to live. And so we ask ourselves to consider, what does it mean to truly be human in space, in all of our expressions, in all of that lived experience? Today, we have an amazing guest, but to introduce her, I'm going to turn it over to Ubi Cimieri.
Hello, hello. Thank you very much, Jason. It's great to be back. I'm Ubi, or Ubaldo Cimieri. I'm a Italian name, via Kansas, via Argentina. You know, we're all a mix of stuff. So that's what brings me here. But thank you for being here. We are very excited today to continue the conversation about what it means to be human, and in space. And I was lucky enough to meet our guest, Chille Bergstrom, a little over a year ago in Paris at the International Astronautics Conference, IAC. And I was just so fascinated by her story and all the work that she's been doing in the space industry. And so Chille, I'm gonna turn it over to you to kind of introduce yourself, and then we'll just dive in if that's cool.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, welcome. So yeah, Chille, tell us a little bit about you and your background, how you got into space, all that sort of thing.
Sure. So I have always loved space and the cosmos ever since I was very young. And when I was 8, I started having an interest in the MIT aerospace engineering classes.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since then, I've always had a love for space, even starting then when I was 8 years old. I took class after class, and then when I was 10, I was formally invited to go to MIT full time. So when I was 12, I accepted and moved, and he gave my presentation at MIT. And I've done many other things in my life, and I'm very happy to be here.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I mean, so you're young. I mean, how old are you now? Can I ask that question? 16. And you are neurodivergent. Would you classify, is that correct?
Yes.
So, you've worked on a lot of projects, you've done a lot of things, you've talked a lot about people with different abilities, people with disabilities, and what that can mean for space. So talk about that. Like what's some of the work that you've done and why? Why is that important for us to explore?
Yes. So it's very important to have equal access for space for all.
Yeah.
Because if you just have a certain type of person going to space, you don't have the outlook that different people from different backgrounds have. My main work is finding disabilities that can be hyperabilities in space. So a disability like cerebral palsy, where your muscles are constantly firing, means that you will be better equipped for space because you don't have to exercise as much.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about that. See, that's fascinating. So, okay, yeah, what are some other examples? Because that's really interesting.
People with high blood pressure are more adaptive in space because your blood pressure lowers. There is this example that I give that if you had to choose between a overweight person and Usain Bolt on a 6-month mission to Mars, most people would choose Usain Bolt, but he would actually be dead in a matter of days because his resting heart rate and blood pressure were so low that he could not survive in space.
Wow, I mean, I had that just blows my mind. I had not thought about that, and I think that's what's really interesting about these conversations, because as we get closer and closer to having a more significant presence in space as human beings, right, as humanity, we have to take all those things into consideration, like that's so. Talk about you did some work recently, or you've been working with the ESA, right? Tell us a little bit about that work.
Sure. So the ESA in 2022 announced the allowment of disabled astronauts into their astronaut program.
Fascinating.
So disabled astronauts, with some exceptions, with some caveats, obviously, can go to space. The criteria are either you have a loss of a limb, you're blind, or some other things that there's a list of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it doesn't go far enough, because these are disabilities that are obvious to some, but there's a lot more disabilities that can be hyperabilities in space.
Like, yeah, give some examples, because you're talking more about disabilities that are less seen, less visible. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. People with neurological neurotypes, different neurotypes, might be better suited for 6 month or even longer missions to Mars, because of they're not as much, they don't have as much need for human connection.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Wow, yeah, that's a great point. And it's, we were talking earlier before we hit record about the application process. And so the ESA, European Space Agency, so you were helping to move that application, that allowance for different types of people forward. What's sort of the next step for you? Like, what's the next phase in your plan to help more people with disabilities reach space?
The big thing now is changing the ESA's guidelines even further, because they only include a handful of disabilities. There are dozens and dozens more that I know that can be helpful in space, and hundreds that we've not even thought about yet. So the main goal I'm doing is finding those disabilities that will be more helpful in space, and changing the ESA's guidelines.
How do you go about doing that? Like, what is your research process?
Talking to physicians, doctors, medical researchers, and scientists about the effects of the human body in space and different disabilities effects, and how some effects with disabilities can help in space.
It's incredible. Yeah, it's going back to kind of what you said about space for all. I think it's going to take all of us, right? I mean, there's currently sort of this disconnect between 800 billion whatever people on Earth and the small group or percentage of people who are actually doing any kind of work in space or for space. Do you have any thoughts on how do we connect that message, right? Like that humanity, all of us, like it's going to take all of us to make this a reality. So how would you go about changing the conversation?
Well, that starts with the next generation. In order to achieve the idea that everyone can work in space and everyone can help space, we need to teach the younger generation that their voice matters.
Did someone do that for you?
A lot of people did that for me. I was very fortunate in having a lot of mentors in my life that were able to teach me and show me what I wanted to learn.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think there's got to be sort of this guiding force from some these older generations to let younger generations know that that yes, we want you to be a part of this. I think that we talked a little bit about, there's sort of this elitist mentality of who can go to space now, right? Like, and oftentimes it's defined as sort of the right stuff, but I don't think that's sustainable, right? And Jason, I think we've talked about this. We've sort of assigned sort of this godlike nature to this current group of astronauts, which I think has done maybe a little bit of harm in what we're trying to accomplish here and what we're talking about here. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, from, multiple conversations but it goes all the way back. Sorry, not to cut my sentence halfway. It goes all the way back to the initial call out for the astronauts, and it fed into this seemingly weird belief of a more perfect human that, even though we're supposedly all equal, but when you have movies coming out called The Right Stuff,
Yeah.
then that means there are people that have the wrong stuff. And now we've moved into a point of judgment and qualification. But then that became so ingrained into our culture. The idea was that if you are an astronaut, you have the right stuff. There's something automatically, inherently, already determined. You are approved. You are a notch above the rest of us, and they're elevated up to a heroic point. But in a way, it almost evolves the rest of us as humans, and it immediately pre-selects out anyone who doesn't fit in that perfect model specific body. You've got to be perfect, you got to have all this, you can't have any variations and all that. So I think what Chille, what your work is doing is very pragmatically redressing that myth and asking us to remind ourselves, really, it's humans in space. It's not the right humans in space. All of us deserve a place to be there, and not just these heroic Hercules and Adonises, Yeah. I want to kind of switch back, and I'm just curious. I'd like to get a little bit more of just speculation. I don't think there's a right answer here, but I'm a huge science fiction geek, and some of the stuff you talked about reminded me of something that came out in a book a while back ago by a friend of mine by the name of David Brin. David Brin, great science fiction writer, wrote the book called Existence. And Existence is, in it, he postulates that autism is not to be looked at as a disability, but that instead that autism can be seen as an evolutionary leap forward, establishing and setting people up for better engagement with our rapidly evolving technological world. So he projects 100 years in the future. It's interesting that what you're talking about here is that we need to reframe ourselves, that all of these things that we often see as, like you said, disabilities, in a way, they're setting ourselves up for success in the new frontier. I'm just curious, your thoughts, if you've, anything on that, from your perspective.
Sure. So I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I don't know if autism is the next evolutionary step or if it is a disability, which I don't believe it's a disability. I believe it's a different neurotype.
Yeah.
Because I believe there are certain neurotypes that people have. But I think that I do believe that the future humans that will be evolving will be into these certain roles, will be into these certain disabilities, and they will become the norm rather than the exception.
Yeah, I like that. I think that is a key thing for us to, going back to what our whole thing was about, was human everywhere. It's almost to the point where I almost wish we could put in brackets the front of our title, all humans everywhere. Like, it has to be a reminder that for us to be human, that word human encompasses the entire breadth, the entire depth of all human experience. And I worry that when it comes to space right now, space seems to be very self-selective of, you either got to be a a brainiac, a rocket scientist, or a billionaire, or some great specimen of physical, prowess. And if you're not that, then you just don't qualify. And in a way, it is reminding us, oh, well, you're not human. No. We're human, all human. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm done with my interlude. I just really
No,
love,
that's good.
it's remarkable. You've really opened my mind up as I'm hearing this, Chille. I mean, I read some of your stuff, but to hear you talk about it is really extraordinary. And I love the way that you frame it as hyperability. The fact that some of the things that which are negative here, or at least are challenging here, maybe challenging, I should change the language, that are challenging here, become benefits there. And that's what we need to begin encouraging people to see. Yeah.
Well, and I think I think all of that needs to be a standard part of our research and exploration of how we can help sort of the first settlers, if you will, or the first human beings to really go and live in space. How we help them to survive and thrive. I mean, I think it's we need those multiple perspectives. I know we've talked about different mythologies, different religions, right, different cultures, but I don't know that we've talked enough about different types of humans. There are different types of humans who all have different perspectives and different abilities, and some people are just better at others with dealing with the unknown. And to your point about autism, Jason, and Chille, we were talking about this, like, that there's that, because that's going to be one of the biggest things, is experiencing something no other human being has ever experienced before. Like, that is just mentally daunting, right? And so what are the right abilities that humans need to have in order to safely navigate those sorts of things? So yeah, it's really just quite fascinating. Where are you at, Chille, with your research? Like what sort of next step now? Like the ESA has sort of taken this big step to allow people with disabilities to apply. Then what about in the US? Are you working with NASA? What are you working with, some of the independent launch, or Blue Origin
Yes.
or Axiom? Like, what are you doing with them?
I think it's very important that we should follow what the ESA has done, and not
Yeah.
just follow it, but do better. Because there's always room for improvement, and there is a lot of room for improvement when it comes to this.
Right.
I really want to push for NASA and other private space companies to be able to allow disabled astronauts to go to space.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We should introduce you to a friend of ours, Adam. He's a body movement expert. We actually interviewed him the first episode for this season. But it's really quite fascinating. He's been a circus performer for decades, and but he's sort of studying how to move better in space. And I think there's just such an interesting crossover here, just from a movement perspective, right? Because I've heard that people, like even on parabolic flights, the moment you lose gravity, is your body doesn't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
It just sort of shuts down. And so it just sort of reboots. So what are some different abilities that people have that can make that transition less harsh, maybe?
People that I believe it was can't hear well or have issues with balance. When you go into zero gravity and you go into space, those issues can be solved.
Oh, interesting.
I think space can sometimes be a cure for some disabilities.
Yeah, so they'll be able to thrive in space
Mm-hmm.
once you take them and put them into that different environment.
Exactly.
So isn't that interesting? So then, I mean, that gets into a whole conversation about, I think, why more humans should get the chance to go, because like you just said, in this case, I mean, there are people who could live a better life there. Would you
Oh, of
agree?
course.
Yeah. So how do you, okay, so let's take this a step further then and talk about like architecting moon villages, for
Mm-hmm.
example. What are your thoughts on who needs to be at the table discussing that?
everyone. Honestly, it has to be. It
Yeah.
has to be thousands and tens of thousands of people developing this. Just how the moon landings were done by hundreds of thousands of people. There needs to
Mm.
be a collaborative global effort on this, because if you don't have everyone's voice, then you have no voice.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man, that's super interesting. Well, so what are you, I know you said you were taking time off of school. So what are you,
Mhm.
what's your focus personally? Like, what are you trying to do right now just for yourself?
I'm trying, I guess what I'm doing is taking a break from the work that I've done,
Yeah.
but also going into new avenues and new projects that I'm working on.
Can you talk about some of those?
Sure. I mean, I started like a regular job is one of the things in my life that I've done.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the space industry, I think new avenues in research, and policy is the two big things that need to be done.
Oh, interesting. So policy wise, like specifically what, like, I know you talked a little bit about, the
More
ESA, but
more funding for NASA
okay.
is a big one that a lot of people don't realize. Like GPS, as it was invented by NASA, a lot of things have been invented by NASA that we use every day.
Yeah.
So when people say, "Oh, we don't need funding for NASA, we need to improve things here on Earth," NASA will improve things here on Earth more than any other company, any other industry.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a great point. That's a great point. So who do you, when you're seeking out that kind of, or when you're, pushing for more funding, what are some of the best ways you found to do that?
I'm still working on that. Um,
Yeah.
it's very challenging when it comes to policy and politics,
Yeah.
especially when I am a scientist. I look at objective facts and not what will do best for the next election outcome in 5 years or something.
Right.
Um, so it's weird working with that, but it's very important to do that because we need improvements in space soon.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you, as we kind of, I think close out, because I mean, everything you've said has been just so impactful, and I think it's changed our perspectives in such a great way. What do you want to go to space? I asked you this before we hit record, but like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think I do,
Yeah.
because if I don't go to space, then who else with my voice will go to space? My voice is my voice.
Yeah.
So if I don't use it, then no one else will speak for me.
I love that. I love that. Well, what else is there? Anything that you want to talk, like, promote, that you have got going on right now that you want other people to see to help get your voice out there more?
Sure, my LinkedIn is my name, Chille Bergstrom. On
Okay.
LinkedIn, I post a decent amount on there, and it shows the work that I'm doing, the advocacy that I'm doing, and how we can, and I promote other people on there, and how we can make space for all.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, Chili, it's great to see you again. Thank you. Really, like, we're going to try everything to help you get your voice out there, because, it's really important, and it's a different perspective that I think a lot of people don't think about, and we need to start thinking about it now, because it's going to make a big difference. So, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Jason, you want to send us home?
I will. So this is Jason. I've been joined by Ubi and Chili, and we want to thank everyone for joining us today at the Human Everywhere podcast. Again, a production of Deep Space Predictive Research Group. Normally with us is our founder, Aliris Ullman, but she was unable to be with us. You can find out more about Deep Space Predictive at deepspacepredictive.com, as well as getting all of our back episodes of the Human Everywhere podcast. Thank you, everyone.